Hey folks, what's up? Lex here, and today I wanted to talk all about My Earthbound Story. Now, for those that don't know, Earthbound is my favorite game of all time, and a lot of that is based off of nostalgia. But it's not necessarily nostalgia like you might think it would be. It's more based on what the game represented to me at the time that I actually played it. It wasn't a game that I played and beat and couldn't put down and was so amazed with. It's actually kind of the opposite. I didn't really know what to make of it. And to kind of explain that, I have to talk about my gaming tastes up to that point in 1995. A lot of it was platformers, racing games, just simple cartoon style games that you would expect little kids to enjoy and play. Certainly games like Super Mario World and Super Ghouls and Ghosts even, but I'd never really heard of an RPG before. So how did I come to rent this quirky RPG that actually didn't sell all that well? Well, back in the day, renting video games was such a huge part of my childhood, and I know many of yours as well. It was really so important to us to be able to rent these games because our parents weren't shelling out money left and right for the most part. I know there were some that did, but they weren't shelling out money just so that we can maybe like a game. These games were expensive even back then. In fact, when you consider inflation, these games were even more expensive back then than they are now. With renting a game, you could take chances, but you also didn't want to waste your rental. You didn't want to waste your weekend with a game that you didn't actually like. So it was always a really tense moment going into the rental store and looking at all the boxes and finding one that you actually really liked, but then it was out of stock. Well, it just so happened that we had a few options in our small town for renting games. We had a couple of local dedicated rental stores. It turns out we had this drugstore in our town called Long's Drugs, and they actually rented movies, which was pretty cool, and they put them right up by the checkout counters. But then they started renting games as well. And so every time we would go to the store and go to the checkout counter, I would be able to look at all the games that they had on the shelves. And one day I saw this big box on the shelf, and it was very colorful and it looked interesting, and I flipped it over, and the pictures on the back showed kids like me having adventures in what looked like a modern setting. I was so mesmerized by this box, I took it over to my parents and said, "Can we please rent this?" And yeah, they let me rent it. And I was on my way home with my very first RPG, even though I was only renting it. But there was one very big problem with this. I didn't know how to play an RPG. I didn't know really what an RPG was. I didn't even know the term RPG. I was so lost in the woods as a kid because I didn't subscribe to magazines at that point. I didn't have the internet. All I had were friends, talking about whatever gaming rumors there were, but none of my friends were really into RPGs, and if they were, they didn't really tell me about it, so I didn't know what the heck I was doing. The box would pop up and say status. I was like, what does that mean? What status? I vaguely knew what status meant, but what did it mean in terms of the game? What did check mean? None of this really clicked in my head at that point in time, so I kind of had to struggle through it. And Nintendo obviously knew that this was going to be a widespread problem with a lot of North American gamers, because they put a strategy guide in a lot of these game boxes, and Earthbound also got the strategy guide. And the rental actually came with the strategy guide, so I was able to at least look through that and try to decipher what was going on, because as great as the Earthbound strategy guide is, it's kind of veiled as this newspaper or magazine, and it's not always straightforward to read through. Now, when I turned the game on, within a matter of minutes, my mind was just being overloaded, like sensory overload. The sound effects and the music on the naming screen alone, being able to name my characters, being able to tell the game what my hobbies were and what my favorite food was. And I didn't even know why it was asking me this, but I thought that was just the coolest thing. It even let me select the text box colors. And it put it in a very fun way of like mint and strawberry banana. I was just instantly hooked. And then the game started. Again, I just didn't know what to do, so I just started interacting with everything I possibly could, and I didn't know what I could interact with and what I couldn't, what I was supposed to do when I found the cracked bat, where to go. I didn't know really what I was doing, so I just walked around. And eventually I found my way through the first part of the game, and I remember it taking forever just to do that, because I just must have been completely overloaded, because I don't know how I could have been so dumb as to not know what to do. But when you're in a new experience like that, sometimes you just get overwhelmed and anxious. But even my experience being overwhelmed with this game was quite pleasant, because the sound effects and the music was just bursting with personality. And the odd characters that you would fight, like spiteful crows and, pogo punks and stuff like that. The weird backgrounds, it just all came together and made a very strong impression on me. I made it as far as the arcade in Onette, and that was about it. It was time to take the game back to the rental store. And I did, and I didn't touch the game ever again. Like, I still have not touched a copy of Earthbound since I rented it back in 1995. I'd love to have a copy for my collection, but number one, the prices are really outrageous on this game right now, and have been for a very long time. And number two, for some reason, I just feel like owning a copy wouldn't be the same as owning the copy I played in 1995, if that makes any sense. But as the years went on, the game still stuck with me. I would ask my friends, do you remember the game Earthbound? With a little kid in a hat walking around, and I'm like, oh yeah, I think I remember that. Nobody really ever played it that I talked to. They just remember somewhat seeing commercials for it, or stuff like that. It wasn't a widespread, very beloved game that I could talk to people about. I mean, that was the first time I ever leveled up in a game, and the environments that you walk around, I don't know, the modern setting really did it for me with this game, because a lot of games use the fantasy setting in that era, and I just never was interested in fantasy stuff like that. So when I saw kids like me walking around places I kind of recognized, like the drugstore, the very, place that I rented the game from, the burger shop, the pizza place, the public library, the hospital, whatever it may be, it was just something I connected strongly with. And I eventually got a computer and got the internet and stuff like that, and I would look up stuff on it and watch videos about it and try to play it on, emulators, and it just wasn't the same, and I just stopped. I was like, no, I can't play it like this. And then on July 13th of 2013, Nintendo decided to release it on the Wii U Virtual Console, and that sold me. I bought a Wii U just for Earthbound. Now, it was only a digital title, but still, I bought my Wii U, and I got an eShop card enough to buy the game. I think the game was something weird like $13 or something like that. It didn't matter. I was finally going to play Earthbound on a Nintendo console. Now, it wasn't going to be the same as playing it on the Super Nintendo original hardware, same copy that I played in 1995, But I figured, you know what, it's time to sit down and beat this game. It's time to see what I've been missing all these years, and it's time to see what it is that I really connected with as a child and why it stuck with me for so long. And yeah, finally, after 20 years, I finally beat Earthbound. Now, this isn't an Earthbound review, so I won't go on about game mechanics and what I like and what I didn't like, and I'm not going to go on about how the story went, really, but I will say that Ness's journey is something that really spoke to me. And even though I prefer the first half of the game, where everything's kind of still rooted in reality and, you know, the modern settings, I still connect with the story even as it goes through its crazier parts. And I realized why it connected with me so much back in 1995. It showed me that I could still be me and have these grand adventures. I didn't have to be an elf with a sword or a supersonic needle rat to have adventures. I could be me and still find interesting stuff to do in my life. Now, it wasn't going to be aliens and stuff like that, but especially early on in Earthbound, Ness is dealing with people who are rude and people who are mean and trying to take advantage of him and trying to be a bully and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, it's really something I connect with. And Earthbound has shown me that we can be our own worst enemies a lot of the time. We are our first and last line of defense from ourselves. In Earthbound, Ness is kind of fighting against corruption. All these people are corrupted by the alien Gygas, but in the end, I mean, corruption can happen to any one of us at any time. And there's some people who spread corruption and encourage, you know, being selfish and all that kind of stuff. I don't believe that anybody is born pure good or pure evil. We all have the potential to do bad or do good. But Earthbound shows us that with the help of others, we can overcome our strongest self-doubts and be a positive impact on our family, on our community, and on our world. And that's basically why I love Earthbound. Sorry to get a little deep on you guys, but this is a really special game to me. And it's not my favorite game because it's the best RPG ever made in terms of combat or music and all that kind of stuff. But to me, it's the most heartfelt, genuine, and it's the one I can connect with the most RPG that I've ever played, and not just RPG, but game that I've ever played. Seriously, no other game has even come close to matching the level of connection that I have with Earthbound. It's just such an endearing game. So what about you guys? Have you played Earthbound? What do you think of it? Do you have a game that you connect with like this that means more to you than maybe it does to a lot of other people? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, this is Lex, signing off.